In the role that I'm in, I work with clients really all over the globe, many based in the US, but some based abroad. And we have conversations about anything and everything. One of the conversations and questions that comes up frequently is about what we see from a breach perspective. And so let me go into that a bit. Unit 42 conducts breach investigations for clients all over the world. In many cases, we're conducting hundreds and sometimes upward of 1,000 investigations per year. And so each one of those attacks, there's similarities, there's differences, but they all provide us insights into what organizations are doing well in responding to these attacks. Like, what are they actually doing different than organizations who are having a harder time responding to those? And so, inevitably, I think the first question I get is what differentiates those that respond well to those that are really challenged? Invariably, it's the preparation that those organizations do in advance to make sure that they can detect an attack quickly, they can respond to it and contain it before it spreads from one system or one application or one part of the network into a much broader, bigger problem. One of the questions I get asked often is about the topic of cyber resilience. I think we hear a lot about resilience. It's used as a term nearly everywhere. And in my perspective, I think it's used a little loosely. I don't know that everyone has the same definition of it. So it's important for me to frame what I think it is as it relates to breaches and, in particular, cyber attacks. When I think about resilience, it's ultimately who can survive a breach? What organization can survive its impact and get back to operational business as quickly as possible? Resilience to me is actions like the ability to know critical operations and restore them as quickly as possible. So that even though an attacker might have access to our environment, they might be trying to conduct destructive operations or disruptive activity. But even through that, my network has the ability to withstand that attack and continue a minimum viable amount of operations to keep the business running. At Unit 42, 86% of the attacks that we investigate are ones that have operational disruption specifically caused by an attacker. So whether that's a nation state who actually wants to cause destruction of an environment, or maybe it's a cyber criminal who might think that they're going to get paid more money on the back end if they can disrupt operations. They have very specific intent to cause operational disruption. So the more organizations know in terms of today's cyber game, then the more successful we can be planning and preparing for that in advance so that we build networks that we can quickly stand up new clean environments. We can make sure that we can conduct operations in a successful way that's not going to cause long-term damage to the business. A lot of times it's reputational damage. And that's a huge area of focus for Palo Alto Networks and for Unit 42. We want to limit any of that reputational damage and operational financial damage so that organizations can be as successful as possible. Attackers throughout the world now are realizing that causing operational disruption potentially has benefits for them. If you're a nation state actor who's looking to embed yourself in critical infrastructure systems, then the opportunity to down the road cause some sort of operational disruption may be the ultimate goal. For cyber criminals, I think that they're more intent on causing this operational disruption because they've seen that it works. Anytime that you have a cyber attack that gets the attention of the media and actually impacts consumers, you've now entered into a different echelon of attack and notoriety. Today, I think that many attackers believe if they're able to cause that disruption, they might have the opportunity to get paid more on the back end. There may be some people out there who hear the word cyber criminals or ransomware actors, and they still have this visual that this is some sort of uncoordinated group on the back end. I think it's really important for everyone to understand that these cyber criminal groups are operating like very professional businesses. Oftentimes, they're connected on the back end to some sort of larger criminal enterprise, which is highly funded. So this visual of some attacker in a basement should really be an attacker that's renting or has bought a penthouse apartment and is flying places on private jets. That's really important for us to set the stage on. These cyber criminal groups have focused a lot of effort and a lot of R&D dollars that they've gained from the attacks they've conducted around the world to be able to successfully operate like a business, to have really sophisticated processes, to train their employees. Let's talk about social engineering. If I'm an attacker, I'm going to call a help desk. I am likely coming in not just with one person who's making a random phone call. I'm coming in with the knowledge of every help desk attack we've ever tried to create. So that means my organization, my attacker team, has armed me with scripts about how to talk to a help desk employee, what objections they're likely to give me, what questions they're going to ask, and the best, most successful responses based on all of the other attacks that our teams conducted. So it's very much like how a really professional company would train their sales force. Hey, ask the customer question A. And if they respond with option one, here's what we're going to respond with. If they give you option two, here's the next line in the script. And they're incredibly professional. So I do think that this influx of money that's come in, and if we can talk about the cyber criminal enterprise and the money that is exchanged on the dark web, it has now become the world's third largest economy. So behind the United States, behind China, we have cyber criminal enterprises and transactions that are going on an annual basis where people and organizations and governments throughout the world are getting billions of dollars stolen from them. So I've been investigating cybercrime attacks for over 20 years now, which some days is hard to believe. In the early days, one of the first questions that we would ask is much more related to the technical data. Like, what forensic data do we have available? What actions do we know the attackers already conducted? What access to systems do they have? And while today all of that is still incredibly relevant, now I'm no longer on that first call, typically talking to an analyst or a director of security. It's oftentimes a much larger group of people that's on the call that involves CIOs, CISOs, sometimes their bosses, certainly legal counsel within an organization, maybe external legal counsel. And a lot of these questions now relate to much more business enterprise questions. So things like, what systems are offline? What operational capabilities do you not have the ability to do right now? If you're a healthcare organization, are you able to deliver patient care today? Are your ICUs in operation? If you're a financial services company, are you processing financial transactions or do you not have the ability to do that? So you can already see the shift of the types of conversations and dialogue that I think people who are responding to breaches need to have. But honestly, any one of us who is working in this field now needs to have a lot deeper understanding of business operations, just as a general practice. And we certainly need to be able to map the questions we have from a technical side, which are often related to data and systems and packets running across a network. We need those questions answered so that we can then provide guidance for organizations to make risk-based decisions. But oftentimes I find that in those first conversations, I'm doing a lot of translation about the data that we need to access in order to answer business questions. And I think those have really fundamentally evolved over the last 20 years and even just over the last 12 months. First, let's talk about what's an attacker's goal and how that's changed. And let's use the phrase causing chaos. I think attackers today, if they're a cyber criminal, their intent might be to cause chaos. That's important for a board to understand at a really fundamental level, that has shifted. We're not just talking about an attacker that comes in quietly to your environment, maybe steals some data, and when they steal it, they're actually just making copies of it. So it's not even super disruptive. These are conversations we've had over decades. Well, that kind of attack is still going on. Now we're seeing this move to cause chaos. So how that translates to a board and how they're thinking about, what do I need to do? How do I need to fund my cybersecurity team? What conversations do I need to have with my CIO and my CISO? Then it really becomes about, how do I effectively prepare my organization to run in an environment of chaos? And so now we have that conversation. How do we make sure that we define minimum viable operations? what does that mean to our business? I was in the Air Force. I started my career in the Air Force. I entered the Air Force in particular because as a kid, I fell in love with the movie Top Gun. I was obsessed with all things aviation. And I say that because we think about it from a military aerial environment. What do we need? If we're in wartime, I still need to have a runway that's available and long enough and safe enough for planes to take off if I'm going to conduct some sort of aerial operation. And that's how we want businesses to be thinking about it. So, should boards be thinking about this in advance of an attack? Absolutely. This means that we have defined what are our most critical systems that are required to conduct the minimal operations that keeps our business running. If you're a financial services company, that might mean your ability to process transactions and conduct settlement at the end of the day. If you can't do that successfully, a regulator is going to come in and say, hey, we don't have confidence in your ability to conduct minimum operations needed, and we are not going to allow you to continue to operate. That's the kind of thinking that then if we can take that and translate it and say, okay, what does that mean? Do I need to procure additional hardware in advance so that I can stand up a new network that's clean and safe at a moment's notice? Maybe there's some software requirements to that. High level business mindset at the board level, at the CEO level, then that's critical that we're talking in this two-way framework where they're able to speak the language of the CIO and CISO and realize that, okay, that means I need to equip my team with the ability to stand up these capabilities at a moment's notice. And if I'm the CISO or the CIO, I want to be able to talk the board member and the CEO's language and say, hey, if these critical systems go down, here's what this is going to result in. Maybe it's hundreds of thousands of dollars of loss per day. Maybe it's millions of dollars. Maybe it's our company literally shuts down because we can't meet regulatory requirements. If we can be speaking that same language, it will result in being more prepared, practicing to respond to these attacks in advance, having systems set up so that if we need to shut down and disconnect from our primary network and start up and initiate a new clean environment, we can do that. And it's ideally in minutes or hours and not days or weeks. If you're a hospital, you may have questions that are related to how many ICU beds are operable right now. How many systems have power to them so that I can continue to monitor critical functions for those patients in my ICU system. In some healthcare environments, that may also extend to, can we process claims? Can we process payments? And if so, or if not, what does that mean? Can we still deliver care? If you are a municipality, your question might be, is our 911 system still operable? We've had a number of ransomware attacks that we've responded to across the globe, but certainly for states in the US where 911 systems have been taken offline. So, what does that mean? Do we have the capability to move to pen and paper and phone number operations while we don't have network connectivity? This is how intertwined these discussions are now, where cybersecurity and the network landscape really serves as a foundational layer for all communications that we conduct, regardless of what kind of organization you are. I think shifting to financial services industries, though, their ability to conduct liquidity and settlements at the end of the day. If a financial organization isn't able to do that, now we're really quickly going to get into trouble with regulators. And certainly you have consumers who are upset about the lack of continuity of business operations. All of those types of considerations really need to be taken into account. And if you are the CIO or the CISO, your teams need to be thinking about, how can I effectively communicate what our opportunity is to continue operations and how it might be impacted if we don't get the kinds of technology investments that we're really looking for. One of the things I think is so critical for us to talk about here is we often hear about breaches and we talk about prevention, detection, and response. And certainly at companies like Palo Alto Networks, that's why we build all these capabilities, so we can ideally prevent attacks. But if they occur and when they occur, we can detect them quickly, we can respond, we can contain them. But we often have that conversation that this is worst case scenario if we get attacked. And it's a really scary thing for so many organizations. And quite frankly, I could say I've spent 20 years responding to a bit of chaos and crisis and helping people through that. And all those things are true, but there's a flip side to that as well. And that's that there are oftentimes opportunity when you are having your most challenging moments. I think that applies to all of us, probably in every facet of life. Certainly, we can talk about that in our personal life, the ability to transform after a really challenging moment. But that's nowhere more true than when we talk about breach response. There are companies and organizations throughout the world who have actually used a massive breach and a massive attack to their advantage. And that's because they were incredibly well prepared. They had communications prepared in advance. And whether it's the CEO, who led the company, or the CISO who's led the company in communicating about the breach to the degree that they actually instilled consumer confidence in them. They made their customers feel an even tighter and closer relationship with them. Some examples we've seen are CEOs who come out and immediately acknowledge we're under attack. We are working and doing everything we can to put all of our resources available to make sure that we keep everyone safe. They then come out on social media, maybe they talk to the press, but they proactively are communicating, here's the status of the situation, here's when we expect things to change, here's what you can expect from us. There are so many great opportunities where organizations have gained even more customer trust and more market share because they went through a breach and people truly respected the way that they ran it. They demonstrated leadership in crisis. And I think there's a silver lining here that we really do have that opportunity. If that's one area that I think we can help more organizations prepare for and then come out of these events successfully, we're all going to succeed more as an industry. Communications as a skill within breach response is probably one of the most important factors. And that's everyone from the responder who's responding to the breach and helping an organization through it to that CEO who may need to communicate to the press, to customers about what's going on. So areas that we really recommend when we're working with customers are having a communications plan in advance. Unit 42 will work with organizations to essentially identify what we would call holding statements and create them. So identify scenarios that we might face in the future in terms of a breach response or an attack or any type of cyber crisis, and coming up with statements that the organization can have already prepared well in advance that are holding to essentially create customer confidence, to buy them time, which is so critical, especially in the early stages of investigation. You need to buy time because you don't have a lot of information typically at the beginning. The situation is chaotic, it's dynamic. New information is coming in by the minute, by the hour, and you need to make sure that you're not sharing incorrect information that can still be changing. So we need to have a strategy where we're providing information that lets people know we've got this, we're on top of it. We'll share more information at this time frame. Maybe you decide we're going to share information once a day. Maybe you say we're going to share information every 12 hours. Really depends on the situation, but all of those type of preparations will be conducted in advance. And that is all part of one of the many services that we offer within Unit 42, which would be related to tabletop scenarios or live response scenarios where you can involve everyone from your security team to the IT department, all of the CIO resources to completely non-security or non-technology related teams like legal teams, the CEO. Maybe you get the board of directors involved. Maybe if you're a highly regulated company, you invite one or two of your regulators in. One of the great things you could do would be invite your software vendors or any type of your security ecosystem in so that you can identify, hey, if we have a challenge in this application that is not something that our company's built and created, that we've got that team involved and we know how to very quickly and rapidly exchange information between these groups. All of this can be practiced well in advance and continually iterated on to make it better, to identify where gaps exist, and then to continually refine and mature those so that in the event and when an outside attacker gets into your environment, you've now practiced this. you've identified those gaps. You've ideally secured many of them well in advance, but this is not the first time that you're working with the FBI, for example, or the first time that your CEO has talked about a press statement related to a crisis situation. All of that can be practiced in advance, and all of that is going to make an organization so much more successful on the back end. When I talk about survival ratio, what I mean is closing the reaction gap. So the premise here and the concept is we want to force attackers to take a longer time to conduct their operations, and we want to give every opportunity for our defenders to decrease that time. And what that does, it makes it harder for the attackers to do what they're doing and easier for our defenders to do what they need to do. So there's some fundamental concepts for that. One, as a defender, they need to be not looking at all these different screens to get information. They need to have as much information as possible aggregated at one source, make visibility as simple as possible so that we decrease the time frame it takes them to do their job. That's going to position organizations to be able to win against an attacker. And then we want to conduct actions within our environments that make it harder for the attackers to do what they do. That's everything from not allowing them to use one account that's going to give them access to the entire environment. It's time limiting privileged accounts so that if they do steal an administrative credential or a privileged account credential, that they then have to execute the task so fast because they checked out that ability to use that account. And maybe they have 5 minutes to use it. Maybe they have even less than that. And so they've got to work and be almost perfect to get done what they're trying to do. All of those types of actions are going to decrease that reaction gap and enable organizations to be so much more successful to survive. One really time-consuming process when we talk about these destructive attacks is the recertification process. When an organization is compromised and they realize that their network is no longer safe, all of the vendors that they're working with, all of the partners have to disconnect from that network. Now the organization has to rebuild a clean environment and has to get recertified by some cases one provider and oftentimes many technology providers to validate that, yes, this network is now safe to reconnect. That can take time to do. So the more that organizations can actually be prepared for processing that in advance, for making the investments in whatever the hardware and software capabilities are to create that minimum viable network, and then to practice with their partners so that in the event that one of these situations does occur, this now becomes a bit more of a routine situation to work through, the better off they're going to be. But not every organization is aware of the fundamentals of how we do this and what's needed, and then taking the action proactively so that we can really quickly move through this process and make that recertification process as seamless as possible. Hi, I'm Wendi Whitmore. I'm the Chief Security Intelligence Officer at Palo Alto Networks. And in that role, I'm responsible for bringing our intelligence insights from every product that we're building and capabilities that we're building for our clients and bringing those to the forefront so that we can really help provide actionable insights for our clients to take and to protect their environments in the best way possible.